So, so basically, this is what I was telling. This is the real state of whenever you consider diabetes. Well, the beat diabetes is so important that this is the area where we need to take proper action and try to identify those individuals who are falling in this particular group, and thereafter manage them such that they turn into normoglycemia, because there is a huge economic as well as the healthcare infrastructure which our country is facing as far as diabetes is concerned. So let's go. What's pre-diabetes? All of us are aware of the fact that it's the intermediate stage between normal glycemia and diabetes. And not only that, it is highly prevalent, particularly in obese individuals, but not so to be considered in India in particular, that we have lean pre-diabetics as well. But the problem lies with the definitions of pre-diabetes. Even in current practice, they are based on different cutoffs, whether it's HbA1c, fasting, or PP, to our glucose. So the major challenge definitely lies with the lack of guidance on when one definition might be preferred over another. Today only the ADA standard of care came, and then AD had its own definition, and they have planned out their therapy accordingly on the management of prediabetes. Randomized clinical trials have demonstrated that lifestyle and pharmacological intervention can be the cost-effective, prevent diabetes, and improve cardiovascular risk factors in adults with prediabetes. So my whole job will be just about telling you a little bit about prediabetes and why it's so important. Because the next part, that's the management of prediabetes, and thereafter reversal, the onus of reversal will fall on the two other speakers of today's program, who are going to concentrate on the major intervention therapy for prediabetes. So the term prediabetes is used to identify those individuals who are at risk for future diabetes. But prediabetes is also associated with high burden of cardiometabolic risk factors and is associated with poor outcome. So this is the importance of prediabetes. It's just not that it is a preliminary to going forward to diabetes, but it itself is a burden of cardiometabolic risk. The increasing prevalence of prediabetes globally is a major public health concern and does not bode well for the growing epidemic of diabetes and its complications. Rather a pandemic, I would say so, because globally it has risen to that label. Now, this is the history basically. When what this first concept came, that was in 1970s when the concept of pre-diabetes emerged. And that was to indicate identifiable stage of glucose dysregulation. Thereafter, if you look in 1979, the National Diabetes Data Group used the term pre-diabetes to designate the impaired glucose tolerance. And that was taken or adopted by the ADA and the WHO. Subsequently, the ADA in 1997 and WHO in 1998 introduced the additional category of impaired fasting glucose. And then there is a different fasting glucose nowadays being considered. That time it was considered to be 110 by 125, which was basically thought about as a pre-diabetes. But then in 2003, the ADA issued new IFG diagnostic criteria where it brought down the range from 110, 125 to 100 to 125. In 2010, the new hemoglobin HbA1c based definition of prediabetes was introduced by ADA along with the first recommendation for the use of HbA1c for diagnosing diabetes. So basically, this is how the concept came along. Now, let's look at the global prevalence. That is where probably we don't have that global prevalence data. We have the US data. We might have some studies with India as well, but we don't have a globally authenticated true picture of where the prediabetes stands. In 2019, the International Diabetic Federation estimated the global IGT prevalence at 7.5% for both men and women. The later estimates correspond to approximately 374 million adults, which is acceptable presently as what the prediabetes stands at. And if you see, the majority of them are below the age of 50. So that again gives you a clue that how important it is. It's going to affect the younger people out here, and about 30% of the patients are within the age group of 20 to 39. So it's no more an elderly disease, neither the diabetes nor the pre-diabetes. It is occurring much earlier in the second, third, fourth decades. The vast majority of individuals with pre-diabetes reside in low and middle income countries, the North American and Caribbean regions have the highest IGT prevalence, and the European region has the lowest prevalence. Unfortunately, India is not counted here, but India has equally great number as far as pre-diabetes stands. Now, this was the US population. Uh, that's about 80 million out of 104. If you try to enroll all the classes of diabetes, whether it's type 1, type 2, or undiagnosed diabetes and all those stuff, 80 million of this population are in pre-diabetic stage as far as the US population is 2010 data. Now, if you look at the what I said, there was an issue with the definition per se, and that is how the pre-diabetes prevalence is going to differ as well. So this is what the chart shows. If you look at the AEC, HbA1c, ADA, HbA1c, ADA, WHO2R glucose, WHO fasting glucose, and ADA fasting glucose, the prevalence is variable as per the definition. And you can see it can range up, it can go up to 43.5%. So this is the problem. If you consider WHO criteria, maybe the prevalence will be less. And if you consider ADA criteria, the prevalence will be more. Similarly, if you look at the hazard ratio for the association, different definition of prediabetes with incident diabetes, or with CKD, or with CVD, or all-cause mortality, again, they vary as per the definition of prediabetes. Now, this is natural history. All of us are aware of the fact that, yes, this progress in this way, the insulin resistance is a culprit. And it is this problem which is at the pre-diabetic stage. So if you are trying to correlate this pre-diabetes with all the cardiometabolic risk, along with the increased incidence of CVD or a marker of CVD, then it is the insulin resistance probably which is going to play a major role. Now, this is the definition. As per definition, if you look at the fasting and fasting oral glucose tolerance test, the pre-diabetes is between 100 to 125 as per ADA, and the pre-diabetes as far OGT is concerned is 140 to 199. Similarly, if you go to the diagnostic of, if you basically, this is the same thing. And if you look at the HbA1c level, then obviously it is between 5.7 to 6.4%, where pre-diabetes become important. The one factor which we need to understand that HbA1c is good, ideal for screening pre-diabetes, but never take that as a face value. The diagnosis of pre-diabetes, which may manifest like IFG or IGT, should be confirmed with glucose testing. So that's very important, even if you because there are a lot of issues interpreting HbA1c, the hemoglobinopathies, etc., could play a part, and we might end up with a error report as far as HbA1c is concerned. So you need to confirm it with the either IFG or IGT in order to diagnose the pre-diabetes. Now, so how do you go about it? It should be the universal screening. Probably it's not not possible. We should always try to do it. Some countries like India and all, it won't be economically viable. And most of the developing countries where pre-diabetes found to be rampant, it's not possible. So you need to screen them in the high-risk group. It's the same for diabetes as well as pre-diabetes. And obviously, I'm going to enumerate those. If the age is more than 45 years without any risk factor, family history of type 2 diabetes, now this age has been cut down to 35. I think Dr. Ajay Kumar can always give an idea on that. It has been cut down to 35. Family history of type 2 diabetes, CVD, overweight, the BMI more than 30, 25 to 29, and plus other risk factors, sedentary lifestyle, member of an ethnic group where it is more commonly seen, dyslipidemia, where it's part of the metabolic syndrome, and PCOS. And if you have the markers like acanthosis nigricans, NFLD, hypertension associated, history of gestational diabetes or delivery of a boy weighing more than 4 kgs, who are on antipsychotic for schizophrenia or bipolar. So there's a gamut of all those conditions where you can consider these individuals at risk, and they should be screened for pre-diabetes. Because it is here we need to catch them young. When we say that, catch them at the pre-diabetic stage, so that we can appropriately manage this, so that they can reverse themselves to normoglycemia. Now, the more so important now, if as far as pre-diabetes, what Dr. Jha wanted me to say was what you are going to say on pre-diabetes. So I would say and reiterate the fact that is all the cardiovascular disease uh, is a major issue even at the pre-diabetic stage. We all know that before the onset of diabetes, the macrovascular scenario starts changing in a patient. So the whole organ system, as far as these particular organs are concerned, they start having those changes even at the pre-diabetic stage. So they actually starts developing, leading to the increased risk for cardiovascular disease, and the pathology behind happens to be the insulin resistance. I think this is not the correct slide. Anyway, I'm going to say I think it's not visible to you all. So basically, insulin resistance is one which is linked to the range of CVD risk factor, and that is that the underlying pathology happens to be endothelial dysfunctions and vascular inflammation. So basically, these two pathology are responsible for all the atherosclerotic events or the hypertension or whatever we call it, and then that may lead to increased CVD. So just at the base, I would say that endothelial dysfunction and vascular inflammation plays an important role when insulin resistance is around, and that culminates into the CVD. And the same thing, obviously, the pre-diabetes are also susceptible to the CV events, whether it's in the shape of stroke, myocardial infarction, peripheral vascular disease, congestive heart failure, inflammatory. I mean, the congestive heart failure and all. All the CV events can get aggravated or can culminate. This pre-diabetes can culminate itself without being in diabetic phase. They might have this through the major contributor being endothelial dysfunction. Now, this is one thing which would give you an idea that the risk of diabetes increases with increasing HbA1c. So if you see this particular window, that is 5.7 to 6.4, which we consider pre-diabetes, the individual, if it happens to be between 6 to 6.5, has a much higher chances of getting into diabetes. And those, obviously, once it is more than 6.5, then it is diabetic. But if you compare that with the earlier marker, that is 5.5 to 6, that the chances of that individual getting into diabetes is less. And those who are in between 6 to 6.5, their chances of getting into diabetes is much more. And this is the prospective observational study way back in NEGM, was published way back in 2010 in NEGM on 11,000 patients without DM or CVD. And if you look at meta-analysis of 18 clinical trials, the risk of cardiovascular clearly seen both the types, impaired fasting glucose and impaired glucose tolerance, that the risk increases with both the events, and this is on the basis of 18 clinical trials. So that's clearly is a pointer that whatever importance we need to give pre-diabetes, with the whole idea and concept that this is a harbinger for CV disease. So we need to manage this pre-diabetes as we give that as a similar way as we give to diabetes. So the pre-diabetes, obviously the management happens to be mainly lifestyle modification. Now even the standard of care has come out with the recommendation of metformin as one of the therapy in certain group of population. But basically, it's a lifestyle modification, which most of the studies have clearly shown, the prevention studies, that it is responsible for most of the cases for prevention of diabetes. So these are the various studies, the prevention studies, the Finnish diabetes prevention study. This was done in 522 overweight and obese patients with impaired fasting glucose. And you can jolly well say the lifestyle was the intervention which was done. And for 3 years, they were followed up, which clearly showed that they reduces the risk of developing diabetes mellitus. So lifestyle, by any studies, which I'm going to enumerate few of them, and it's a clear-cut intervention measure which one needs to undertake in pre-diabetes, and that should be strictly followed. So a lot of counseling, education, etc. need to go while managing pre-diabetes. It's more a collaborative effort which we undertake for diabetic patient. The similar kind of collaborative effect, even a psychological support need to be given to a pre-diabetic patient. And this was a study, Japanese, 458 Japanese men with impaired glucose tolerance randomized to standard lifestyle intervention or intensive lifestyle intervention. You see those intervention group has a lesser chance of developing to diabetes. So again, it's like reiterating the fact that in various studies over time, the prevention studies have clearly shown that lifestyle modification has a much greater role to play, and that should be strictly adhered to. And this was again we all talk about this Indian study, and here have clearly shown that the lifestyle is, even if you add metformin, you're not going to benefit much with the addition of metformin. It's almost similar, whether it's lifestyle modification per se or a metformin lifestyle combination. They almost have a similar kind of impact as far as reducing the impact of incidence of diabetes in these pre-diabetic patients. They all were Indians with impaired glucose tolerance, and they had three arms: the control arm, metformin, and lifestyle and modification, and metformin and plain lifestyle. So it clearly proved that the lifestyle is the crux of all the good management practice as far as the pre-diabetes is concerned. This was the stop NIDM with acarbose. This also showed a benefit, and this clearly showed that it reduces the risk of diabetes. So I'm not going to detail in all this stuff. Basically, what it showed, over 3.5 years, it was followed up, and no less than 1,400 patients were taken in, and they showed acarbose also showed a reasonable kind of impact as far as reducing the risk of diabetes. Similarly, the DREAM trial, which added on another stuff, that was that not only reduce the risk of diabetes, but also reduce the risk of death. That was with the ramipril trial, and this was performed on IGT and IGF, both impaired fasting and impaired glucose, but without known CVD. So again, this also comes with the fact that the glitazones might have a role as well. ActNow, which is the glitazone, bioglitazone, where it was involved, and they showed that a relative risk reduction of 72%. That was a huge in impaired glucose tolerance patient or impaired fasting glucose, and it was followed up at 2.4. So overall, what we could say with the various prevention studies, that the lifestyle along with sub-pharmacotherapy has been able to reduce the incidence of risk of diabetes in pre-diabetic stage. But still, what we are, the rule of the thumb happens to be that it is to be the lifestyle modification which need to be the intervention which is needed for pre-diabetes. And these are the whole gamut of various trials, which were the prevention trials. And you can see almost lots and lots of drugs were used. We have already told about pioglitazone and acarbose and rosiglitazone. There's another study, voglibose and all. So basically, in spite of all the studies, still the recommendation goes for what our two speakers are going to speak on subsequently. These are the various other trials. Similarly, we consider the Indian DPP and the Finnish trial, and all have clearly showed that lifestyle is the whole idea behind managing the pre-diabetes is lifestyle. So this, if you just look at this algorithm, so basically the same thing is again re-emphasized, that lifestyle modification where you have assisted weight loss should be the ideal way of managing. If there are other CVD risk factors, they need to be managed along with the HbA1c or the glucose glycemic targets. Weight loss therapies are plus minus. They have not been recommended, but if there is a weight loss therapy which you need to initiate in this group of patients, they can be thought about. There is no recommendation as such. And these, once they progress to hyperglycemia diabetes, obviously you have to follow the algorithm. anti-hyperglycemic therapies, obviously, one such a recommendation is there that the BMI is more than 30, or the patient is having gestational diabetes, or in those cases, metformin has been recommended. So, otherwise, I think still we have to depend on the lifestyle, which have to be followed very strictly with lot of impression on the patient, and it just cannot be say you have to undertake a lifestyle modification or you have to do those changes. You have to follow up. The follow-ups have to be seen. You have to call them to the clinics or remotely wherever it is, and try to emphasize that this has to be continuously undertaken so that we can achieve that normoglycemia. I think, as because I'm not going to management, because Dr. Jas clearly told me we have diet and exercise to be talked about separately. So what I want to say from my talk, or I want to give this message, is that pre-diabetes should not be taken lightly. It is the harbinger of all the evil. I have said in this. It is a cardiometabolic risk. It can lead to CV events, so it has to be managed very, very tightly. And the whole idea of reversal of to normoglycemia should be entertained at this level. Thank you, friends. Thank you, sir.